Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of the Edge in Education. And we're here today to learn about creativity and critical thinking. We have been working with Garfield Gini-Newman for a number of years now, and he has really embedded himself in our community and worked with our educators and has spoken to parents as well about how we can practically apply the kinds of things we talk about in our mission. We talk about empowering learners to think critically and creatively, and how we engage learners in the learning process. And he has really helped us move the dial forward in that. We were just talking about the fact that ISP is not the kind of school that rests on its laurels. We think we're a very good school, and we know we can be better. We know we must, you never arrive. You have to keep trying to get closer to what we aspire to in the mission of the school. So we're really excited to have Garfield Gini-Newman here. The title of this talk is about empowered learners. You may know that we just hosted the CISA Teachers Conference at ISP and also at the Intercontinental Hotel. We had 500 teachers from 43 countries come to Prague for this conference. And the theme for that conference was also empowered learners. It was a very inspiring conference, and it really validated and confirmed what we're trying to do as a school. So without further ado, welcome Garfield Gini-Newman to chat with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. So good morning. Is it going to warm up? I was told about 2 days before we arrived last week it was 15. Right? And then and it's been cold since. But the Easter market is delightful. I just wish it was a little warmer when I'm visiting it. So as Arnie mentioned, we're looking at empowered learners, and I want to tell you, a little while ago, I've seen at times someone posted something on Twitter that said, it's not engagement we want, it's empowerment. And I kind of paused, and I want to tell you, I think that's an unhelpful, I'm not sure why we try to put one against the other. So I was really happy when I come in and I see inspire, engage, and empower. We want both with our kids. We want kids engaged and empowered. It's not a one or the other. So when I was setting this up, I want to think about, what do I think are the keys if we're going to empower kids to be learners? And some of the conversation we've been having is, how do I get kids to be excited in any subject area? We were talking the other day with some science teachers. I don't have to want to be a scientist to get value from understanding science, right? That knowing math, I don't have to become a mathematician for there to be value in math. So if I want children to be impassioned as learners throughout life, I'm going to suggest one of our challenges as educators is to inspire wonder, just to get kids excited to want to visit somewhere, how many of you were inspired by a teacher to read an author that you maybe otherwise wouldn't read? Does that happen? I had never heard of this, or turned on, anyone's bucket list grow because of a class you took? You say, I really want to visit there sometime. Right? I did an ancient Greek and Roman art and architecture course. And you know how many places that, oh man, I've got to get to Knossos one day. So good teachers really inspire wonder. And that to me is a starting point. But the next part is, how do we develop the intellectual tools? So the other piece is, I don't want you just to wonder about, I want you to be able to think deeply about. I want you to be able to engage. This is where we get to the engage and empower. I want you to be excited, but I want you to also be able to think deeply about. And I want you to be able to be creative. And how do we innovate? And the more we hear in the world today, with automation, in Canada there was a study about last year, 42% of jobs in Canada will be lost in the next 20 years due to automation. 42% of jobs. What does that mean for us? It means innovation is going to be a key in the emerging economy. And how do we nurture that kind of creativity?
Just to have,
yes.
We get this presentation?
I can.
It will be embedded in the video. John will embed it.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to start just a little bit. This past summer, my nephew, who's in Berlin, finishing his doctoral work in genetics, got married to a girl in Greece, and so we went to Greece for their wedding. And while we were there, of course, we visited the Parthenon. Isn't it amazing I got this picture with nobody in it? Because truth is, there were thousands. This was patience and trickery, because it was a lot of people. So I met up with my sister at the wedding and said, so did you get to the Parthenon? And she said, oh yeah. What'd you think of it? She said, it's a pile of rocks. Right? Did I hear you just go, because I was like, a pile of rocks? How can you say that? It's the Parthenon, right? And I thought, where did school somewhere along the way not inspire you to see beyond the rocks? Like when I was there, I see an ancient civilization. Socrates is put to death just down here, and democracy blossoms, and art, and like I see this world. She sees a pile of rocks. So it struck me that how in school can we inspire wonder and get kids past the rocks? And so my thinking is that school should be a place. By the way, what I'm putting here is it should be a place where students experience a world beyond what they experience every day. Like if all I'm doing, this is why I get a little worried sometimes. Well, we'll just let kids study whatever they want. Well, that's putting blinkers, kind of blinders on students. Well, I like dinosaurs, so all I want to study is dinosaurs. Well, there's a world beyond. And part of school's job, I think, is to open up our eyes to things I wouldn't have thought about. So yes, I want to capture kids' passion. Sorry for the Van Gogh as Batman. But I want to get kids to think about issues and places and so on that they wouldn't have thought of otherwise. And school is that opportunity to open that up for kids. So I'm going to suggest to you in a digital world where so much is carried around in our pocket, it just seems to me increasingly delivering a lot of content is a bit redundant because I can look it up on my phone pretty quickly. Have you been in airports where they have avatars? We were in the Dubai airport a while. There was an avatar telling me what I could put in my carry-on. I thought, this is really cool. I didn't understand the Arabic, but it was showing you and so on. And I thought, if school is about content delivery, if that's what drives us, then we can put an avatar at the front of every classroom. It's way cheaper and way more efficient. It'll just, but that's not what school is. School, to me, the two pieces I want to suggest, wonder should be at the core, be the driver. Opening up kids' eyes, getting those moments where kids just are passionate, but then putting thinking at the core of learning. So it's not just, now that I've got your attention, let's think deeply, let's discuss, let's explore. So we want to put thinking at the core of learning. So I want to get into, I'm going to kind of touch on these three areas of inspiring wonder, nurturing thinking, and promoting and nurturing creativity. So the starting point for me, how do we get classrooms to be wonder-driven, is kind of rethinking assessment. So assessments aren't that, for how many of you was assessment that kind of nasty thing that after some learning, get ready for the test, right? And kids tend to fear assessments. I want kids to be excited about assessments. The pictures you see up here, I was teaching an ancient history class probably 10 years ago. It was a grade 11 class. God, maybe it was 20 years ago. And I said to my students, your challenge, I'm taking you to the beach in a month and we're going to build sandcastles. And you have to pick the most impressive, important site of an ancient civilization. This was a Roman bath complex that they were building. This was the Greek theater of Epidaurus. Here you see a pyramid rising out of the sand. So by the end of, the children had from 10 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon, and by 2 o'clock, an area of a beach in Toronto, probably double the size of this room, was covered in sand sculpture. Now, I need you to understand, I don't care if my kids are good sand sculptors. That wasn't my learning goal. Okay? This is what had my kids excited. I was using this to say, can you ask good questions? This was the beginning of the year. Can you frame good research questions? Can you find reliable sources? Can you make good research notes? Can you collaborate with others to pull off a fairly impressive piece? I want you to note later, we're going to work on using those research skills that we've developed to do a movie review, to eventually write a history essay. So this is about building the competencies kids need to be good researchers, but by grounding it in a sandcastle competition, my kids were excited. So I hope that makes sense. By the way, we didn't mark sandcastles. We invited the local media in, newspapers showed up, TV stations showed up. My kids let off the news that night. They were excited. Right? By the way, you have something like this going on in the school that I'm hoping to get out. The bakery that launches tomorrow in kindergarten. So I'll just show you a couple of quick examples of what I mean. Trying to make learning where kids see a connection and a relevance. So for example, if the kids are learning about political systems, government, civics kind of thing, one of the ways we framed it is Elon Musk hopes to colonize Mars eventually. And a lot of the talk is the science that is needed to colonize Mars. What about the governance? You're going to put a bunch of people up there. You better figure out a way you're going to govern them. And see, I would use a course in politics or civics to have kids develop what can we learn from past mistakes, things that have worked. If you could write a letter to Elon Musk with 10 pieces of advice for how to govern the colony on Mars once it gets there, what would your best advice be? By the way, I mentioned this to another teacher. They sent me this link. Elon Musk has been talking about how Martian government will operate. He's starting to talk about what it would look like. I want kids to engage in this. You know, what mistakes have been made, what has worked, what hasn't worked. Let's use our understanding of. But to me, that would be relevant to kids. You have a blank slate up there. You get to create a new government. So I use this to talk about what I call moving learning from fake to real. And so there are two dimensions here for me. You know, one is product and performance. Like, what do you want kids to create? And over here, I'm going to suggest to you that for our students, for our children, writing tests is not what life is about. Well, as adults, would you agree? My guess is you had to write lots of tests yourself. They're gatekeepers to higher education. How many tests do you write now? How regularly do you write tests? Not very often, right? Yeah. You write tests every day? Which ones?
What? With your kids. You're writing.
Good point. So what I'm suggesting here is, you know, we can move from, and by the way, I see it as a continuum, from tasks that are what school makes us do versus what life makes us do. And I'm interested in, can we move along to more authentic tasks? This is why I love the idea of the bakery in the kindergarten, is learning through an authentic task. But the other piece is, who's the audience? So if I'm doing really interesting, authentic things, but I'm just handing it in for the teacher to mark, and then I bring it home, it strikes me as a missed opportunity, because kids really rise when they have an audience that's not just the teacher or their fellow classmates. How many of you have seen the movie School of Rock? Have you seen School of Rock? Yeah. It's a classic example of a real audience and a real purpose. Maybe not the best teacher in the world, but real authentic learning. So I want to be thinking about, what can I get kids doing where the audience is beyond the class? Now, the reason for my 4 quadrants, if the task is something kids don't see as meaningful beyond, I have to do it for school, and if the audience is simply the classroom itself, I put it in the fake. I might have something where there's a real audience, but the task isn't that rich. Or I may have a rich task, but the audience isn't that authentic. And I want to play in this blue area where kids are creating things that are meaningful and sharing them with audiences. A grade 1 class I worked with in a school outside of Calgary, Alberta, the children were learning about money. And their question was, what could you buy with 10 cents? And they went to the local seniors' home and they interviewed the seniors about when they were young, what did they used to be able to buy? Right? And the children came back and then had to create a series of sentences and they created a storybook that they then polished and published. And then they went back and read their stories to the seniors. Right? I love the fact that they shared that with a real audience. Right? It was lovely. The children would write about, you know, how when the seniors were young, you used to be able to buy a cigar with 10 cents. And I thought, we didn't filter this very well. Unless it was Cuban, then it was $1, they said. Right? So I wanted to just share a little bit of an example with you. Sorry, I got this. Here's an example I saw. This will kind of fit into the fake, real, and kind of teacher, math class was learning about 3D shapes. So the teacher brought in some chocolate bars and said, what do you notice about the shape in the packaging of most chocolate bars? What shape are chocolate bars in their packaging? A rectangular prism. Is there one chocolate bar you can think of that isn't a rectangular prism? In their packaging, there's still rectangular prisms. Which one in their packaging on the shelf stands out? Yeah, the Toblerone, right? Part of Toblerone's marketing is the distinctive triangular shape. We all know when you see that, but whether it's a small one or a big, it doesn't matter. They're always triangles. They stand out on the shelf. So the teacher said, well, I want you to do the same thing. I want you to figure out a shape for cereal. She had videotaped the cereal aisle in the grocery store and said, all cereal boxes look the same. A company wants you to help them launch their new cereal, but they need their cereal to stand out. You have to create a different shape. And the children are asked, what 3D shape could you use? But notice they were given some criteria. It has to ship easily. You have to be able to stack it at home and on store shelves, and you have to be able to pour from it. The kids began to play with, they learned about shapes, they used nets, began to create, design. So I love the fact that they had a purpose. They're learning about 3D shapes, but with a purpose. Now, I want to tell you, I love this task, but I would put it in this area. How come? I thought it was a wonderfully authentic task.
Because right now there's no audience for it.
Yeah. The kids created their boxes, and they brought them in, and they sat in the classroom, they got graded. I think it would have been more powerful, though. Could you invite a parent from the community in who's in marketing? Could you send this to a local company for feedback? Is there some way we can create an audience? So I think anytime kids have that audience, how many of you have seen your kids, when they have a performance, they rise to it? And they're probably not coming to say, I wonder how my mark is, when we've got a concert that we're going to be playing at. Their performance matters to them. I'll show you a couple of other quickly. Grade 10 science unit, they're learning about energy. And the challenge for the students was to design a giant slide and try to convince the local town council to build your slide. And we began by just saying, which of these do you think goes fastest? And the students immediately thought, this one. But I see you saying, this one's actually faster. Because every dip is an energy conversion. It's picking. So the kids, their jaws dropped when the teacher had a little model. So then the challenge was, okay, design the most exciting slide, but has to be safe. And they're given some criteria. Can you come up with a great slide? But you have to explain the science, because you have to convince the town council that this slide can be built, it will work, and it will be safe. Again, notice the kids were learning about energy, they were learning the science, but they were using it for what they saw as a real end, as a design. Here's an example in math. Kids were learning about transformations. And they were given this challenge that the town has grown a lot in the last few years, in fact, doubled in size, and so the local pool isn't big enough to accommodate all the children anymore. They need to double the size of the swimming pool. Could you do it? And so the question they were given, can you do it? What would be the first thing you think kids would do? You have to double the size of the swimming pool. How do you do it? Oh, by the way, you can't touch these trees. They're heritage trees. Okay? So kids start to just add on. Becomes a surface or area issue. And then we said, oh, we forgot to tell you, it has to stay a regular shape. It can't become an irregular shape. Can the size be doubled? And the kids would think about it and we said, well, let's set that aside for a moment. And they learned about translation, rotation, dilation. They learned about different types of transformation. And each time they learn about one in math, they would try it out. Does that help? Oh, no, that didn't help. Okay, what about the next one? And as they learn, the kids would start to see, well, if I rotate it and dilate it, and so then they would. By the way, I want you to know they're learning their math through trying to solve a problem, an authentic problem that they're engaged with. Notice the problem drove the learning, not the other way around. All the math wasn't taught and then said, now solve a problem. It went the other direction. Can you solve this? It gave purpose. And then as they learn the math, they continually apply it. And we're just doing some reading recently on, if we're going to get to automaticity in math, how do we do it? And does practice matter? And the research very clearly says, yes, kids need to practice math. But if they're not practicing it and processing, in other words, thinking about it, you don't get to automaticity by just memorizing. I just read a study last night I was looking at with the new PISA scores. US has dropped further down this. And they found all the students performing well on the PISA scores in math. None of them are being taught to memorize the math. They're being taught to think about or process. So not only do I have to practice, but I have to apply it in some meaningful way. So the research is showing kids need to have authentic context. Let me show you an English example. This one, a teacher said to me in November, what's November like here? Is it? At home it's dull and gray and same? Yeah. And I mean, at least in December you get the lights coming out a little. But is December a bit of a depressing month? Like dreary? No, November, sorry. Is November a bit? So this teacher said to me, we've got some really depressed kids and it's a tough time of year. It's a long stretch. He said, I'm starting a unit on poetry. And he said, I wonder, is there a way I can use my poetry unit to uplift the spirits of children? So we started to create our criteria. What would make an uplifting poem? And we said to the kids, you're going to publish a small collection of 10 or 12 uplifting pieces of poetry that we can share with others in the school just to try to raise their spirits. But every day you come into my class, we're going to look at a few poems. We're going to unpack them and understand them. And if you think they have an uplifting message, they use language that is joyful, they evoke positive emotion and inspire hope, we'll put that in our short list to possibly be published. And if you don't think it does, every time children read a poem, they would analyze it, they'd discuss it, and they would make a decision whether these criteria were fully met, somewhat met, or not at all, and they would defend it, and then they would decide, and as they worked through 20 or 25 poems over a unit, they had to shortlist them to the 8 or 10 most powerful. I'll give you a quick example. Oops, sorry, I went the wrong direction there. This is a poem called Reflections on a Gift of Watermelon Pickle received from a friend called Felicity. During that summer, when unicorns were still possible, when the purpose of knees was to be skinned, far above and away from the softening effects of civilization, during that summer, which may never have been at all, but which has become more real than the one that was, watermelons ruled. Thick imperial slices melting frigidly on sun-parched tongues, dribbling from chins, leaving the best part, the black bullet seeds, to be spit out in rapid fire, against the wall, against the wind, against each other. And when the ammunition was spent, there was always another bite. It was a summer of limitless bites, of hungers quickly felt and quickly forgotten, with the next careless gorging. The bites are fewer now, each one is savored lingeringly, swallowed reluctantly, but in a jar put up by Felicity, the summer which maybe never was, has been captured and preserved. And when we unscrew the lid and slice off a piece and let it linger on our tongue, unicorns become possible again. So I'm going to ask you, just take a minute at your table, should that poem make it into our short list of uplifting poetry, or do you think it isn't an uplifting poem? It doesn't raise your spirits. If you could just take a couple of minutes, I'll put this back up. And if you want me to go back to the poem so you can reread, let me know. But just take a minute. Uplifting or not? Does it meet my criteria? So let me get some thoughts. Do we keep it in our short list? Do we toss it back? Is it uplifting? Not uplifting. It is uplifting.
For us, it's not the same. We think differently.
Okay, give me some evidence or connect. Remember my criteria. Did it have an uplifting message? Did it use joyful language? Did it inspire hope? Did it have positive emotions? Tell me something that either did or didn't meet that criteria. Why'd you say yes or no? So I'm not trying to get... Who can give me a reason or a piece of evidence?
I said yes to all of them.
Okay, why?
2,
Okay.
I think it's nice if in a month like November you can actually feel the taste of watermelons.
Okay, so
We're
that...
talking about unicorns, possibly again.
So that has the hope, that positive memory. Okay, someone give me a reason why I'm not sure it's that positive.
I think that nostalgia is a false happiness. You remember it for a moment, and then oh, my childhood was so wonderful, and then it's kind of real. It's something that was lost in a way, and also something that is not real because nostalgia it's false memory in my view. So
Okay. And I'm getting the sense that you're saying, and this is remembering back at a time that's past, that was good. Bittersweet. Yeah, it was good, but it's gone. And so you're feeling this may cause me to be more melancholy than okay. Yeah.
Melon in your mouth.
But the title, I think, is quite optimistic because it's about gifts from friends. And when we preserve things, I mean, we've all probably in this part of the world, in the winter, eaten compote or pickled vegetables or something, and they're different, but they're really good. And if they've been given to us by friends, and if we can give it as gifts, we didn't even have to go buy them. I think that's quite positive.
Okay, so I love the way you connected the title. Yeah.
For me, I could sense in a like moment of melancholy, there is consolation and hope in this poem because it's the revoking of the summer memories and something to wait for. And those unicorns that usually, I remember them from images that are colorful, yeah? They have rainbows around.
Okay, beautiful.
It's possible again.
Beautiful. By the way, what I want you to see in this, I don't have a right and wrong answer. I haven't come in saying this is a good poem and you should like it because I like it, or this is the conclusion you're supposed to draw. What I loved about this when we were setting this up with the teachers, every day the children have another poem to grapple with and debate and discuss, and you're making a point, and oh, I hadn't thought of that. That's an interesting point. Oh, that's true too. And the kids, they have to make a decision using reasoning. My goal is that I'm making you an independent reader of poetry to think and reflect on. Not that I'm telling you this poem I have pre-decided and this is what you're to believe. So it sets up children to, and by the way, because we're looking at uplifting poetry, can kids get engaged in it? Now, I want to show you the last step that we created. Once you've looked at the poem, if you think it's worth keeping, remember, this is trying to raise the spirits in the dark days of fall and winter. So when the children come into the school, we want to greet them with that uplifting poem, but you have to select an image. Those kind of inspirational posters? So you have to take a section of that poem, and you have to marry it to one of these images, and then you have to come in early one day and put it up. So when children come in that front door, they're greeted by a picture and a line from poetry. By the way, when you walk through the school, you see these inspirational quotes. So that kind of idea. When I see this, I go, I needed that. That was nice. Tell me, which of these pictures is least suitable? Which one does not match the poem we just read? Whether you like or dislike the picture is not my question. Which of these pictures least fits the poem we just read? Which one would you not use?
Right above.
This one?
Yep.
How come? What's wrong with this one?
What is it?
Okay, so it's not clear. Is there another one you wouldn't use? Okay, so it might be a nice picture, but it doesn't really fit. Which one would you use? Connect it to the poem. The beach. Okay, because it's got that summer, so on. Anyone thinking up here? Why this one? The setting of the sun, the end of a day, the reflecting back kind of fits. By the way, again, notice we're looking at some visual literacy here where kids unpack and think about, I'm not asking you which picture you like the best, I'm asking which one would best mesh with the piece of poetry you've picked so we could put them together. Okay?
How do you know that's a sunset and not a sunrise?
Because I took it. Otherwise, it's a good point. That was in Greece. Here's one more we use in a science. How many of you have seen Guardians of the Galaxy? The movie Guardians of Anyone not seen it? Okay. I need some help from those of you who have, because when my wife said, I said, you really should watch this movie. It's a really good movie. She said, what's it about? I said, well, there's a raccoon in a tree, and they're in outer space. And she just looked at me and said, why would I watch that? Right? It's a superhero movie, and there's a character named Groot, and we're not really sure what Groot is. He's kind of plant, but he moves, he talks. Well, he says, I am Groot. And the question children are asked, these are grade 7 science students at a school in Los Angeles, is Groot more plant or animal-like? But I want you to know, it's important that we don't ask this, is he a plant or is he an animal? That's what we call a binary question. He's either this or he's this. That doesn't prompt the kind of rich conversation I wanted. But when we ask, is he much more animal, somewhat more plant, or much more plant, where would you put the dial? And the children would set their dial and they'd try to make their case. We showed them a short clip. They were learning about the body's organ systems. And every time they would study the respiratory system, they'd go back and they'd watch a clip again and say, is there evidence that Groot has a respiratory system? Well, yeah, and they would start to look for, and they'd connect, then they'd look at the digestive system. Do we have evidence that Groot has a digestive system? Yes or no? And as they learned and debated, you would see the kids, well, actually, I'm changing my mind now. But they always had to defend why they were shifting their belief. It was a wonderful way to connect a movie all the kids had seen to say, but did you ever stop and think, what is Groot? And how can we use science to understand? I want to show you a parallel one. This was a grade 3 class. And their question was, which type of severe weather is the most dangerous? So the first thing the children did is build criteria for what would make weather dangerous. Okay, so they talked about what would that mean? And then they were told they can vote tornado, hurricane, thunderstorm, blizzard, or drought. And these are all the children's names, and they voted what they thought was most dangerous. By the way, we were talking last night, we call this a launch. 5 minutes into the unit, we ask kids this question, where would you put it? Tell me why you think that. And some children may say, I don't know, I just vote, I'm not sure because I don't know much about. Some might say, well, I think this. Okay, fair enough. each day the children would read a story about, or they would learn about an extreme weather. The day I was sitting in on the class, they were just learning about drought, and at the end the teacher said, so does anyone want to change their vote? And when the children said, remember it's California, and they started to realize, oh, droughts lead to wildfires, and that's threatened our community, and children began to want to move their vote down to drought, but they had to justify why you move. Give me a reason why you're moving it. It was wonderful to watch these children, 8 years old, using science to justify the movement of. Again, there's not a right and wrong answer, but the discussion, the rich discussion, was interesting to get children engaged in. I'm going to show you one last one, kind of timely for last week. Kindergarten class, we're learning. They were doing a STEM project, but it was how to catch a leprechaun. Okay, they have to catch a leprechaun, and so they built some criteria. A good leprechaun trap would meet these 3 criteria. Has to get stuck, has to work by itself, has to have a way in. And the children began to construct, and they would read about leprechauns, and they would learn about, and then they would start building theirs. And then they were shown some examples. Which one do you think, based on what you've learned so far from the stories we've read, which trap do you think the leprechauns would more likely go to? So they're judging which one better attracts the leprechauns. And then they'd go back to their own trap, and they would make changes. What was lovely to watch is the evolution of the children's thinking from, if you had to build a trap the first day, what about the third day? What about a week later? And the more they learned, the more developed their traps became. But it was also lovely to see the way the teacher integrated both numeracy and literacy, because as the children were building their trap, they were thinking about, how did I use a cone, a cube, a cylinder? And then the literacy, I used a cone for and so there's some beginning writing, some telling, understanding of shapes. So it's just a lovely way that literacy and numeracy were woven into kids, hands-on constructing a trap. And then they did the last little bit, just a bit of procedural writing, how to catch a leprechaun. First, next, then after that, finally. So just engaging kids in the construction. So those are some examples of where I think assessments can actually excite kids. Like, these are assessments kids want to do because they're interesting and they see purpose. So then our question becomes, so how do we...
What's a leprechaun? Does everybody know what a leprechaun is?
Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay. This is a great question. By the way, I should point out before I clarify, this is why it was really important for the children to...
I can't catch it if I don't know what it looks like.
Maybe. The children had to read a story, and as they read, they would learn. Who can help me define? It's imaginary, Celtic, St. Patrick's Day.
Okay.
Yeah, rainbow, the pot of gold. Yep. Why is it not fake? Okay. Great question.
So this is imaginary catching.
So Teresa asked an interesting question. How do we ensure this is not fake? Let's start with this one, product or performance. What would make it authentic? Given, by the way, I understand if you say, well, if it's just about leprechauns, and I can't catch one. But if I'm having kids design and create something that could work, we could easily then adapt. So they're building something hands-on. They're not just learning about. So I think we can argue that moves this way because we could build a mouse trap. We could build other types of traps, right? But I think the other side is the more interesting one. The fake real audience. What do we need to do? Huh?
Invite the Irish ambassador.
Good point. Someone was telling me they visited Iceland, and Iceland, the belief in trolls and so on is like you don't like. Yeah, have you heard that? Someone told me they were in Iceland. Like, you don't question. Anyway, but I think this is something that needs to be shared beyond. That if I spend all this time, I create my trap, and the teacher says, good job, and now you can take it home, it has less impact than, now let's share these with others who can come and see our traps. I see things in the school. You have an art exhibit. that I went to visit yesterday, where your art will be on display. Others are coming to see your art. You have a bakery starting, people are going to come to the bakery. So the same thing here, if we were tying this into St. Patrick's Day as part of a St. Patrick's Day celebration of some kind, there's a real purpose to it. And I think that's an important connection. Otherwise, it has the potential to sit as fake. I wanted to just move into, I'm cognizant of our time, when we are talking about, so we can do these engaging tasks, but are we engaging kids in thinking deeply about them? And some of you, were any of you here last year when I spoke? Some of you may, this will be a bit of a refresher then. Remember, critical thinking is not to criticize, so when your children are asked to think critically about something, you're not asking them to point out the flaws or the problems, that's not the root. Critical thinking, we're asking children to make thoughtful decisions or judgments. We're asking them to make reasoned decisions or thoughtful decisions. And at the root of all critical thinking, oops, sorry about that, is the use of criteria. Critical thinking comes from the Greek word krikos, which means criteria. All critical thinking is making thoughtful decisions in light of criteria. So if you're trying to think about, what should we have for dinner this evening, I can either do what am I craving, which is not a critically thoughtful response, or what would be quick to prepare, healthy, and meet the dietary needs of everyone coming to dinner. I'm making a thoughtful decision in light of, or I need to buy a gift for someone. Do I buy what I like? Because if they don't like it, I'll just keep it. That's not a critically thoughtful response. Can I afford it? Will they use it? Is it something that they value? Those are using criteria. So when we're working with children, we're trying to get them to how do we make thoughtful decisions. A character in a novel. Who's your favorite character is not a critical thinking question. Which character was most heroic is. So one, I could use a set of criteria. So I'm going to show you very quickly as an example this image that we used at the conference at one point. This is Burnaby, British Columbia, just outside of Vancouver. And we ask, if you were to tell me, this picture was drawn in 1942, and I want you to tell me what month this is, what day of the week this is, and approximately what time of day. Month, day of the week, and time of day. Okay, I'm just going to give you a minute at your table. Use all the evidence you can find. Don't ignore clues. And if there's any contradictions in the picture, we have to explain them. Okay? So I'll just give you a couple of minutes. Tell me the month, the day of the week, and the time of day. Sorry, when I was at the back a little, I noticed there's a woman here, hard to see. She's wearing a broad-brimmed hat standing in the bushes. A woman here. She's probably picking raspberries. Okay? Here, these are raspberry bushes. Sorry, one other interruption. I just realized, do you see the mountains at the top of the picture? In Burnaby, those mountains are in the north. Those mountains are in the north, and the plain you see is in the south. Okay? Just give you a couple more minutes. The mountains are in the north. All right, I'm going to ask you to shout out for me. What month is this? August. July. Anyone think it's earlier or later than August or July? So we end of June. Okay? Day of the week. Saturday. Wednesday. Anyone think it's Sunday?
No.
You seem certain it's not Sunday. Okay? Time of day within about an hour.
No.
I'm going to push you off the fence. Just before or just after?
Just before or just after?
10? 10 o'clock? A little before noon? 11:30? Anyone think it's afternoon? How late? 2 o'clock? 1 o'clock? Okay, when we do an exercise like this with children, we give them a 5 W's chart. Who's in the picture? Where's it taking place? What's happening? And then we have 2 columns. What can you observe? In other words, what do I see in the picture? And what can I infer from what I see? So when I unpack this with you, I'm going to push both. By the way, how many of you have very young children, say 4 or 5 years old? Anyone have 4? Okay. If I had this picture and I said, I found this picture and I kind of think it's midnight in February, what would a 4-year-old say? I think this is midnight in February. Why not? Why is that not a good answer?
There's a shadow.
How do you know there's light? Because notice I see a shadow. That's my observation. my inference is the sun must be up. I don't see a sun, but I see a shadow which tells me. Yes, I can see in the distance. There's no sun in the picture, but my inference, so getting kids to understand there's an observation, it's light, inference, the sun must be up. Okay? Give me some other, why is this not, is there other evidence to support this is not midnight? The chickens are out. I had one little boy say, if you notice the child on the swing, I wouldn't be allowed out at midnight, right? So I don't think it's midnight. Okay. How about February? I think it's February. The way they're dressed doesn't, so notice they're dressed lightly, observation. What's your inference? It must be warm enough. Conclusion, it must be a summer month, right? Is there other evidence in the picture that suggests that I don't think it's a winter month? There's no snow. The leaves on the trees. You wouldn't garden in the snow. Windows are open. By the way, each of these are an observation for which we can say, and that tells me this, and therefore I can conclude this. All right, so take what you said, July, August. Why? Or late June?
Picking raspberries.
Picking raspberries. So based on what you know about raspberry season, it would make sense. Is there other evidence that would fit? That if you say, well, normally we would pick raspberries in July, so I think that fits. Is there something else that would support that? Harvesting, okay. Does that look like a late summer garden? Late summer. Does that look like an August garden? Why not? Yeah, it's pretty short. I mean, they might be harvesting lettuce or weeding potatoes, but if those were potatoes, they're pretty small. Okay. So that might suggest it's earlier than later in the summer. Is there other evidence that would support? Let's go to the day of the week. First of all, why did you reject Sunday? What are you assuming about the family's background? That they're Christian, right? By the way, we want to make sure we say to kids, we're assuming it, and that's probably a good assumption, but we are making an assumption.
Well, actually, I questioned that because if it's 42, it's during war. The food requirements could be,
Yes.
different. I mean, the demand for food. So people might be working on Sundays as well and be excused by the church for that.
Beautiful.
This came up in this table, but we thought this is more like relevant for Europe. I think less relevant for.
Well, actually, in Canada, we planted victory gardens to support the war effort, which I'm going to come back to in just a moment. Is this a farm? No. How do you know it's not a farm?
No machines anywhere.
No.
Big houses around you,
Yeah, no. You can see the houses here. There's no outbuildings, right? So this isn't a working farm, right? By the way, farmers in Canada at least have told me you wouldn't put your garden that close to the house if you have a farm. You have space. You don't plant your garden right beside the house. Okay, well, what time of day? We had an interesting range from 11:30 to 2, maybe even 4. How do we know? What time is it?
Because of the length of the shadow.
So what about that? So the shortness tells you it's close to midday? Okay. So the shortness of the shadow tells you it's close to midday. So which side of midday?
East of midday.
Why?
Well, you said that the background was north.
This is north. So where's the sun? Has to be in the west. To cast that shadow, the sun must be in the west, making it afternoon. But it's a short shadow, so it's not too late in the afternoon. Why would some of you say, no, but I think it's morning? Is there evidence in the picture? Yeah, but she's feeding the chickens. And typically we feed chickens in the morning. And I've had people say you normally don't pick fruit in the heat of the day. You would pick your fruit earlier, right? So how do we, by the way, which of these two pieces of evidence is stronger? Yeah, we can't change the sun. We can try to explain why they might be doing chores. Why might they be doing chores later in the day?
Because they forgot in the morning.
They forgot in the morning. Because they were at church and they were busy.
They went to church in the
Right?
morning.
Okay?
It's earlier in the summer. It's not
Okay, it's not so hot because it's early in the summer.
Because it's a hobby and they want to enjoy.
Okay. What do you feed chickens? Corn, seeds. Why is that a problem in 1942? You'd raised this earlier. What's going on in 1942? War. So we need to save all the grain to send to the war effort. So what else could I feed chickens? I think you said it. Leftovers. Is it possible they've just had a midday meal, they've come home from church, and they're doing some light chores while she cleans up the scraps because you don't want to waste any? Would that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that we thought it was not Sunday, and now we're focusing on their going to the church and eating the
Okay.
leftovers. So something changed there.
Or it could be Saturday, and they're doing, still cleaning up after a midday meal. Should I give you the answer now? Could you just take a minute at your tables? Why should we not give your children the answer if we do an activity like this with them in school? Why should we not give them the answer? Could you just take a minute and see if we can come up with a reason we should not give the answer? All right, give me a reason. Why should I not give the answer? Give me a reason I should not give the answer. You want to start me off?
You don't know the answer.
I don't know the answer. Give me another reason. Why should I not give the answer?
So we can think further.
Okay, would any of your children come home and ask you questions? If a teacher did this, would your children come home and say, okay, I still don't, Mom, can you tell me? Or Dad, can you tell me that? Would they talk to you about it? Yeah. But if I give the answer, it stops. The thinking's over. So if I really value thinking, I want to let kids work it over, think about it, talk about it. Give me another reason I should not give the answer.
Maybe there are several answers, different answers.
Okay, and I'm going to train kids into think there's a single answer, and I hold it if I give the answer, right? But if I don't give the answer, we could get multiple answers emerging. Okay? Yeah.
You're just fostering more creativity and curiosity.
Okay, so I'll nurture more curiosity. And by the way, do you think if I told you we're wrong, do you want to do this next time?
No. And there's, I won.
Yeah,
You were wrong.
it becomes winners and losers now, right? You guys got it right, you guys got it wrong. By the way, Donatella, I want to go back to your comment. I actually think in schools we need to shift away from right and wrong. I actually misled you. Notice I said, should I give you the answer? And you were right, I don't know the answer. It's a drawing from 1942. But I could give you a sound answer. I suspect this is early July on a Saturday afternoon around 1 o'clock, and here's my reason. I could give it to you. And you could say back, I disagree, actually. You could give me an equally good answer. See, I think we should be interested in sound answers, strong answers, not right and wrong answers. Right? It's more engaging, deeper thinking. And by most right and wrong answers, I can look up on my phone. Right? If I really want to engage kids in becoming good thinkers, I'm interested in weak versus sound, and I want to help them develop sound answers. And I want to just touch on a couple of things. How do we get kids there? And part of it is problematize everything. Like, we use this word problematize. Everything in class is an invitation to have to think and solve a problem. Okay? That's like learning. Everything we do can invite kids to think. Let me give you an example. Even teaching content can be a way that kids are engaged in thinking. So sometimes we might say, but kids need to learn some content to be able to answer questions. Sure they do. Doesn't mean I can't do it in a critical thinking way. So let's say you're in the market for a new car, and the Tesla looks good. And I'm thinking of buying a new car. And here are some facts about the Model 3 Tesla. It has a range of 345 kilometers per charge. It has seating for 5 adults. It comes in red, black, silver, and gray. It can go from 0 to 100 kilometers in under 6 seconds. It costs $35,000 US. And in Ontario, if we buy it, we can get a $14,000 rebate. Canadian, which is, like $500 US or something, because our dollar's weak. That was a little less exciting when you added the Canadian. I want you to tell me which 2 facts in my list are least helpful for you to make your decision whether or not you would buy that car. Which of the 2 facts are least helpful in you make your decision? Just going to give you 30 seconds to share a thought. If you got to get rid of 2 facts because they're not going to help me make my decision, which are the 2 least helpful?
The color.
So I don't care about the color. Okay?
And the 6 seconds.
The discount in Canada. I'm not buying it in Canada, so that's irrelevant. You said,
The 6 seconds.
yeah, so I'm not buying a sports car. I don't care how fast. Right? Okay. By the way, I want you to note, I just was using this as a model. I'm just teaching content right now. Here's a list of facts. But I just problematized it. I said, which two are least helpful? Right? And you crossed out one, you crossed out different, but I got you thinking about the facts. I could just put this up and say to students, here are facts about a Tesla, make sure they're in your notes, it could be on the test. There's no thinking involved in that. Here are a number of facts, you have to cross out two of them, turn to a partner to decide which two are least helpful. I've now engaged you in thinking. By the way, we know from the research that children are more likely to remember information that they've had to think about, that they've had to process. Writing this down and trying to memorize it is less effective than having to think about it. I retain it better. So that's why I said I problematize everything. Whether it's what title should I use, what information should I keep.
Just a question.
Yeah.
Is challenge a better word than a problem, or a problem is a better word than a challenge?
Well, it's a great question you ask, because we use the word critical challenge all the time. Like in our work, we talk about give kids a challenge.
Challenge kids.
To challenge them to think.
Better than problematize.
Yeah, problematize, the complaint sometimes is it sounds negative, like it's a problem. And that's why we talk about framing challenges for kids. So I just can't challenge. I have to think about the language. But that's a great. I want to, because we only have a little bit left, I want to touch on now creativity. So we've been talking about we want to engage kids in making thoughtful decisions, reasoned judgments. And part of my talk at the beginning said we also want to nurture creativity. I'm going to just give you a very short minute. Which of these best represents the relationship? Are critical thinking and creativity two different ways of thinking? Do they share something, but in some ways are distinct? Is one a subset of the other? And if you say it's this one, which is the purple and which is the orange? Which one is the other one part of? Or you could say, I don't think any of them work, and have a different. What's the relationship? Critical thinking and creativity. What's the relationship? Just going to give you a short minute to share a thought on that. So let me bring us back together. Do any of you think A is the best? Are they separate ways of thinking? Would any of you pick A? Okay. By the way, I want to tell you, probably 20 years ago, this was often how it was talked about, critical and creative and separate domains. How about B? We began to look at the intersections, but remember, B still has that there are times there's no critical thinking and creativity, and times there's no creativity in the critical. Anyone feel more comfortable with C? What would be here and what would be here? The big one's creativity, and critical's a subset. Anyone have the reverse? You could reverse it. Anyone feeling a bit constrained by any of these? Like they're just, like when you were saying this one, I have people sometimes say, well, this one, but I want the purple to be much, right? So you see it more like a pulsating dynamic. It's not fixed. That the problem with any kind of two-dimensional visual doesn't really work, because I tried this one a little bit, with a yin-yang where one is bleeding into the other, and there's always components of one in the other. Does that work a little? Like it tries to capture in a 2D space. I just want to touch on a couple of things. I do think that creativity is often undervalued, or we see it as not having as much rigor as critical thinking attaches rigor, and too often creativity is seen to be kind of fluffier, let kids kind of play about. And I would argue that creativity is equally rigorous to critical. They're both quality thinking, and what we need to stop doing is seeing them as one is somehow more intellectually rigorous than the other, and understand that creativity is good thinking. And notice it's always purposeful. The word creative, the root of the word creative is to create. And you create with a purpose in mind, and you create with an audience, even if the audience is yourself. But we're creating for reasons. So creativity is actually the production of something both novel and useful. And I'll show you, these are the criteria that researchers in the field of creativity fairly commonly use, that for something to be considered creative, something has to be produced. So if you have a great idea but you never do anything with it, we tend not to say, you're a creative genius. You keep having ideas, but you don't take them and you don't develop them. By the way, I could develop a theory. It doesn't have to be something tangible. I could create a product. I could create a piece of writing. But you do need to act on ideas. That action needs to be novel. So if you could replicate a famous work of art that looks exactly like the original, we wouldn't call that creative. you're technically skilled. You're very, you can play that piece of music just like it was recorded, but you didn't add something to it. So there has to be novelty. But notice the third one. The novelty has to add value. If it doesn't work, well, that was unique, but it didn't work, we wouldn't call something creative that fails to meet. Remember I said all creativity has purpose in mind and an audience in mind. So if I asked you to write a new national anthem for a country, I'd have to think about, well, what makes a good national anthem? What should an anthem sound like? I could write a great song, but you'd say, well, that's not really an anthem, right? So it has a purpose, and did it work? So when our children are engaged in creative exploration, it is always purposeful. It always has a reason for it. And I wanted to show you a couple of pieces. This is the framework we use in nurturing thinking, whether critical or creative. Make sure our classrooms are places where kids feel safe, that if you're going to take risks and it doesn't work, that's okay. Like we have to create that space where I can try something out and I'm not going to be laughed at, or I don't have to worry about my marks, but I get to play around with ideas. We have to create assessments that allow kids to explore and be creative, but we also have to give them the intellectual tools. So any good thinking, critical or creative, you can't innovate in a field you know nothing about. Okay? For kids to be creative, they have to know something about the subject area that we're asking them to innovate. If I don't know any science, it would be difficult for me to come up with a new way of doing something that requires an understanding of science. We need some criteria. I have an idea, but how do I know if it's a good idea? Because I can generate lots of ideas. They're not all good ideas. So at some point, when some of you are playing with critical and creative and they have a relationship, well, at some point when you generate ideas, which should I spend time developing and which do I let go of? Is part of that process. I'm going to show you a couple of quick strategies. And what are the habits we want to nurture?
In business, normally we use the distinction between creativity and innovation.
Yeah.
Innovation is something that has added value to, and it can be used. But you can still be creative.
Yes.
Without necessarily adding value or having a purpose or falling into the straitjacket.
You can, but that creative will still have a connection to something. So it's not a product or a service I could sell, but if I want to, I want a more creative way to lay out my gardens at home. I have a purpose behind, and is it working? So creativity always has this element of, did this achieve the desired outcome? This is what I hope for. Because creative is not just, it's new. An example, at home, I like a grilled cheese sandwich, okay? And I thought, and I like peanut butter. So how about a grilled peanut butter sandwich? I thought, man, I'm a culinary genius, right? Put the butter on my bread, put the peanut butter in, put it on. What happens to peanut butter when it gets warm? It just ran down my arm. Like, it was a huge mess, right? My son, who's a chef, would have said, well, Dad, if you had thought about the properties of foods you were using, you'd have been able to say that's probably not going to work.
Still creative. You didn't end up with a product, but the process. It was still a creative process.
Well, now I need to loop back and say, if I'm going to really, then I should be looping back and saying, now that didn't work, but what if I did this? What if I did this? If I have something that just simply didn't work and I walk away from it, then we wouldn't tend to say that wasn't a creative solution because it wasn't a solution. It didn't work. Yeah, it's a part of the process, but it's not the end. So I need to, what we want to allow our kids to do is say, that didn't work. How might we think differently about it? Now what might we do? So if I have a problem in math, I could attack it this way. That's not working. What do I do? I want to encourage kids to not say, well, that didn't work, and I'm walking away from the problem. I'm looping back to the problem, going deeper and deeper.
But why does it have to work every time? Why can't it just be creative and stay in that space of creative?
Well, I can, because, yeah, that's okay. The research around creative, because to create is to produce something of value. That's
innovation. Beyond creative.
Reading the biography of Da Vinci right now, if you think about all that he did in all his notebooks, he wasn't able to actually have the value at that time.
At the time.
It was all novel. He produced the ideas in writing. It was sometimes centuries later that people actually
could see the value.
Took it so that's an interesting.
Yeah.
I would align with that.
And the interesting thing is, and people who work in the field of creativity get concerned when innovation's too much infused, because they want to allow kids to explore without having to create a product, right? So it's an interesting tension. But we also want to get kids to say, when something didn't work, that's an opportunity for them to loop back and figure out why and understand and go deeper, and not simply say, well, that didn't work and chuck it aside. Like the real learning comes when it didn't work and I have to figure out why it didn't work. That's where the real learning lies. Because there's lots of things we do, but it's the trial that we want to go through. I want to show you one of the key emerging theories in creativity is constraints. Putting constraints in place. Notice when I said here are facts about Tesla, but you have to get rid of 2. That forces you to think. So let me show you a quick example. If I ask children to write me an entertaining story, this is a painting of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital city, which is now Mexico City. If this picture came, tell me a story that would bring this picture to life. Okay, that'd be an opportunity to write. But watch if I said to the children, actually, you guys, your story has to have fantasy in it to be magical. What would you add to your story to give it an element of fantasy? You guys, yours will be funny or comedic. How could you bring this picture to life in a way that could make people laugh? What would the comedy be? And you guys, I want yours to be dramatic. Yours has to have a dramatic element to it. Notice what I've done is each of you, I've put a constraint in place. So tell me a story, but could you make yours this, yours this, yours this? So kids could start bringing the picture to life, but now they loop back and think, oh, how could we add a dramatic element? How could we add a comedic element to it? And they start thinking about it. I wanted to show you before we wrap up. By the way, this is a kindergarten challenge where students were to design a mitten. Notice they were given criteria, right? And they started to play with different materials. Yeah. And would think about, is it working? I thought it was a lovely example of children creatively exploring the use of materials to meet a desired outcome. I'm going to show you just a couple of things. One is giving kids strategies. So one of the keys in creativity is fluency. We just need to be able to generate lots of ideas. And there is a phase in creativity where you want to be able to say, just get all the ideas you can. And if we had lots of time and I said, I want you to generate ideas, if someone's at your table saying, oh, that won't work, oh, that's a bad idea, you kill the fluency. So the first phase of creativity is just to generate ideas. Get everything you can on the table, no filters. Get rid of criteria at this point. So here's an example. If I said learning is like whitewater rafting, you start by simply saying, what does whitewater rafting make you think of? And let's see if we can generate as many ideas as we can and see if any of them link back to learning. But don't worry about learning right now. Just worry about whitewater rafting. So shout out, whitewater rafting makes you think about? It's exciting. Give me another. Have strategies. Danger, adrenaline, teamwork, risk-taking. By the way, as we generate these, we could say, now which of the 3 of those could we best use to help us think about our mission statement as a school? What do we want? So we notice, but I didn't think of school as no, our brains tend to think in linear directions. These strategies have me moving laterally. So I'm making connections that I otherwise wouldn't have thought of. I want to show you one other, and then I'll finish with one last quick comment. Do any of you know synesthesia? Do you know this? Synesthesia is a condition where wiring in the brain is crossed over, so the senses are so synesthete, or someone with synesthesia, numbers have a color, like they don't understand. Like 5 is purple and 7 is orange, and doesn't everybody know that? Or sounds would have a flavor. If you have a moment sometime, look up Melissa McCracken. She's an artist, McCracken, M-C-C-R-A-K-E-N, Melissa McCracken. She's a visual artist, but her paintings are what she sees when she listens to music. And they're stunning works of art, but when she hears a John Mayer song or whatever, she imagines this picture and then she paints it. Because as a synesthete, she's seeing things that you would say, what do you mean you see music? Well, she does. We can use this as a way to help kids generate ideas that are not obvious. So if I asked you, we'll use this because we're here to talk about, if learning were a shape, what shape would it be? If learning were a shape.
Anything it wants to be.
Anything it wants to be, okay? Someone else give me a shape. What shape is it?
Circular.
Why a circle? Okay, a different point. Okay, give me another, because it's endless. Give me another shape. What's give me a shape? Learning were a shape.
A triangle, but upside down.
An upside down triangle. Okay? How come?
Because you start from middle and you
And you expand. Beautiful.
It's a fractal.
Okay, why a fractal?
Because you can always, well, it's multi-dimensional. We can always add the piece.
Beautiful.
The shape.
By the way, I want you to notice what I was doing is very intentional. I was given a shape. You said it could be anything, and I can say, oh, okay, we're done. I haven't pushed thinking when I said, okay, give me another. Okay, circle. Tell me what. Give me another. Remember, this is about fluency. Let's see how many ideas we can get on the table, and then we can pick the best ideas we want to work with. If learning were a color, a sound, a smell. By the way, these are things I don't normally think about learning. We were doing this with a group of grade 6 students, and they were doing an anti-bullying campaign for the school, and they were to create a poster, an anti-bullying poster. I just substituted bullying for learning. If bullying were a shape, what shape would it be? You know what the kids said? If bullying were a shape. Sharp. Well, they said triangle. Because? The points. Yeah. Another boy said a sea urchin. Because it had a whole bunch of points. You know, we said, what color is bullying? If bullying were a color. Black. Gray. One little boy said burgundy. And I said, burgundy? He said, well, red is the color of the pain you feel, and black is the isolation you feel. And when you put red and black together, you get burgundy. Right? And I said, whoa, 10 years old. What I want you to understand, though, is when the children went to create their posters, sorry?
What school was he going to?
When the children created their poster, the decisions they made were very intentional. So notice they were being creative, but the children would say, okay, I'm going to use burgundy letters because the burgundy represents this, and I'm going to integrate these shapes in. So the decisions they were making to construct their poster had very thoughtful reasons behind them. It wasn't just my favorite color is this, or it was what would this represent. Right? So I wanted to show you that we can give kids tools to unlock their creativity. And the last piece I want to encourage or add to is this issue of time, that children need time. They need to be given these problems as early as possible and allowed to fail, allowed to muck about, allowed to make mistakes, and to figure out why this isn't working. And what we've been encouraging teachers at the school and what they're embracing, let's take these rich projects our children do and don't put them at the end of the unit after the learning. Put them at the beginning and come to school to learn to help you solve that problem as you work your way through. So we want to allow kids lots and lots of time. And I'll just finish with this. See if you know, who is this? After being cut from his high school basketball team, he went home, locked himself in his room and cried. Do you know who that is? Absolutely. But he persevered. He kept trying. Who was demoted from her job as a news anchor because she wasn't fit for television? Do you know who that is? Oprah Winfrey. Okay? But she persevered. Do you know who was fired from a newspaper for lacking imagination and having no original ideas? Walt Disney. And finally, do you know whose grade 8 teacher told his parents there's no sense in going to high school because he had little chance of being successful in high school? No, that was me. So, we persevere. We keep working at it. I'll finish with these last slide. Does everybody know John Cleese, the comedian, the British comedian? John Cleese said in something I was reading for some research around creativity, he said, a colleague of mine in Monty Python was a much more talented writer than I was, had more natural talent than I did. He said, but I always produced better skits than he did. And I was curious why my skits turned out better when he was a better writer. And he said, I realized that he would come up with an idea, and that's the idea he had run with. He said, I didn't. I stuck around for hours, reworking my idea, thinking it, changing it. This was like what I want, to think with your kids. I learned to live with the problem longer, and because I lived with the problem longer, I produced better skits. Our children need to live with problems, let them percolate, let them think about it, let them make mistakes. The longer they live with it, the richer, the deeper the thinking, the better their understanding. We can cram, last minute for a test, but the retention is very little. Let me think about, let me muck about, let me make mistakes. And lastly, Andrew Staunton is a filmmaker with Pixar Films, behind some of the biggest Pixar films. And I love his advice to people is fail early, fail fast. And what he says, if you're making a movie and you realize late in the process that your movie stinks, You just lost millions of dollars for the movie company. You need to realize early this idea is not going to work, has to be reworked. I would imagine in business, you do not want to find out late in the process that what you've been working on actually isn't going to make you money. It's a little late. We've invested a lot of money now. He says fail early, fail fast. And I would say the same in our classrooms. Let kids try an idea. This isn't working. Good, let's figure out why. We've got time to figure it out. So both of them saying the same thing. Kids need time to try things, to muck about, to make mistakes, and to, with teacher guidance, move forward.
The other side of the coin is the later you fail, the more money you lose, the bigger the learning.
Because of the loss of money. Good point. Thank you. I think I've gone over a little. I hope there was some useful pieces of what we're trying to do and the learning that's happening. And thank you so much for your attention this morning.
And thanks again to Garfield, and thank you. Again, it's a partnership. It's complex. Learning's complex. Children, humans are complex. So we really thank you for joining us in this journey and trying to do the best we can with all children and all learners. And we're trying to do it, so thank you for joining us in this journey. And for those, we'll have some informal time hanging out with Garfield if you would like to ask further questions. And we'll get in, those were asked, some people were asking about last week's video. Dragan's done with it. We're just waiting for Banhar's slides, and he will get it up as soon as possible and let you know when these are available online. Thank you. Have a great day.